What if everything we were taught about the Bible was completely wrong? For many of us, the Bible was introduced as sacred history, a record of real events and real people chosen by God. We were taught that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But what if that's not exactly true? What if Moses wasn't a historical figure at all, but something far more profound? What if Moses was a symbol, a teaching tool, a mythological character designed to communicate deeper truths about the human experience, the nature of consciousness, and the evolution of the soul? Today, when we tell stories, we do it for many reasons: to entertain, to teach, to express values, or to provoke thought. Every story we write, whether it's a novel, a movie, or a myth, carries lessons within it. The struggles of the characters, their triumphs, their failures, their moral choices, they all reveal something about human nature. But thousands of years ago, storytelling served a much deeper purpose. It wasn't just entertainment. It was how cultures preserved wisdom. Stories were the classrooms, and myths were the textbooks. Every hero, every journey, every miracle was a symbolic teaching, designed to encode spiritual and philosophical lessons for those initiated into the deeper meanings. Moses, in that sense, wasn't meant to be a biography of a man who lived thousands of years ago. He was meant to embody the archetype of the spiritual teacher, the liberator of the soul, the guide through the wilderness of ignorance. Through Moses, we receive the stories of Genesis, the creation, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah's flood, the Tower of Babel, Abraham and his descendants, and finally, the Exodus. But here's the key point. These stories weren't about ancient history. They were written as symbolic reflections on human nature and spiritual transformation. They describe not where humanity came from, but what humanity is and what it could become. Long before the name Moses ever appeared, the cultures that produced these stories already had them, scattered across tribes and generations in different forms and variations. Each version contained unique lessons, metaphors, and local symbolism. The genius of whoever created Moses was in uniting all these pieces into one cohesive narrative, a grand story that could hold all of the spiritual teachings of the culture in a single, continuous arc. In that way, Moses was less a man and more a personification of wisdom itself, the voice through which the culture could speak its collective philosophy. When you look closely at Genesis, you start to notice that it doesn't behave like a historical record. It behaves like a layered symbolic text. Adam and Eve aren't the first humans. They're symbols of consciousness awakening to knowledge. The serpent isn't evil. It represents wisdom, transformation, and duality. Noah's flood isn't a global event. It's a symbolic purification, a rebirth of awareness after chaos. The Tower of Babel isn't about architecture. It's about pride, fragmentation, and the fall of unity. Each of these stories mirrors internal psychological processes, reflections of human evolution told through the poetic language of myth. But when those symbolic layers were lost, the stories became literalized, turned into supposed historical accounts rather than living teachings. For centuries, religion has treated these symbolic stories as literal fact. And while that helped create powerful belief systems, it also obscured the original meaning. Instead of using the Bible as a mirror for self-understanding, people began to use it as a weapon for argument and control. And in that confusion, people started inventing their own explanations, many of which still exist today. This is why we see modern theories, like ancient aliens or UFO interpretations, being tied to biblical events. For example, when the book of Exodus says a cloud descended to guide the Israelites, some claim it was an alien spacecraft. But ancient Hebrew symbolism shows it could have simply represented divine guidance, or even natural fog, symbolizing uncertainty, giving way to faith. Every culture's myths used natural phenomena as metaphor, but when we lose that symbolic language, we misread the message completely. So, if Moses didn't write Genesis, who did? Modern biblical scholarship shows that Genesis was written and compiled by multiple authors over centuries, weaving together older stories, myths, and oral traditions. Each author was not recording history, but using the past as a mirror to explain their present. They wrote about humanity's origins to make sense of their spiritual condition, to provide a guide toward transformation. Moses, in this light, becomes a symbolic unifier, the literary voice through which an entire culture's wisdom was organized. He didn't create the stories, he embodied them. When we strip away centuries of dogma and translation, we begin to see the Bible for what it truly is, a sacred text of transformation, encoded in the language of myth and symbolism. It's not about literal events, it's about inner events. It's not about geography, it's about psychology. It's not about people who lived long ago, it's about you. The Exodus is the story of leaving ignorance behind. The Promised Land is the realization of inner peace. The Ten Commandments are not just laws, they're stages of moral and spiritual evolution. When read symbolically, the Bible becomes alive again, a timeless manual for awakening the soul. So what if everything we were taught about the Bible, about Moses, about Genesis, about the nature of God, has been misunderstood for thousands of years? What if, beneath the literal stories, there's a hidden wisdom, one that unites spirituality, philosophy, and self-awareness into a single message? Maybe it's time to look again, not as skeptics, not as blind believers, but as seekers of truth. Because the Bible's greatest secret might not be who wrote it, but what it was always trying to tell us. If you enjoy thought-provoking perspectives like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Like the video to help more people discover these ideas, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.